Hey there. You have found the Highs and Low podcast, and I'm your host, Lauren Estrada. I have a passion for my hometown of Kansas City, so this show is all about giving those local businesses and entrepreneurs an additional platform to share their vision, their why, and of course, their highs and lows. Join us every Wednesday for new episodes. Hello. Obviously, you are listening to the Highs and Low podcast. I am Lauren, or Low as some people call me, and I am so excited that you are here. I am so excited that I am here. I'm so excited that we are all here. I have been working on this podcast for quite a minute, and I just can't believe it's finally happening. And here we are, very first episode. So I wanted to do this episode solo just so you can get to know me a little bit better as your host and how I got to where I am to be wanting to do this. So honestly, let's just dive right on in. So I live in Kansas City, which I feel like is kind of obvious if you're going to do a podcast about businesses in Kansas City. But to state the obvious, I do live here, and I have always had an interest in local businesses. I feel like most of us try our best to support local, but I love to actually hear the behind the scenes, the story of how they got there, their why. And I wanted to dedicate this podcast to helping spotlight some of those issues and also just cool stories, cool origins. And so you can get to know the face behind some of these businesses better. So, what makes me the expert, you ask? I'm not one. That I don't think is the point, but I feel like I have always been that person that if we're deciding between a couple of restaurants and I hear it's a locally owned restaurant, done. That wins over all of them. But just in general, I love to spotlight these business owners, obviously, and I like to give them an opportunity to show more of them rather than just their business front. I want to get to know the person behind all of those business decisions. So let's go back to the beginning, shall we? So I like to say to people that are not from here, oh yes, I have grown up in Kansas City. I've lived here all my life. But here's the funny thing for those of us that do actually live here. I actually grew up in Odessa, which is about 45 minutes east of Kansas City. So I think some people like to call it a suburb. I feel like if it takes you 45 minutes to get to downtown, that's not a suburb, but you know, what's here nor there. But I grew up in this small town. I never moved, born there, lived there, went to school there until I moved away for college. And I think what started this journey for me would have been I had parents that did not have the traditional 9-to-5s in my formative years. That I had a dad who was a farmer, and I would say the first 10 years of my life. And then my mom stayed home with us, obviously being the homemaker, and assisting him in whatever he needed. So because of, not seeing your parents do the normal, what you would see in the movies of off to work, honey, running out the door with my briefcase, I saw what could be a different path for me, that there are all kinds of jobs out there that are not the quote traditional jobs as a lot of millennials and even Gen Xers were brought up to believe. And I think that definitely started it. And then my dad ended up going back to school and got his degree to be able to do HVAC, or heating and cooling. And as a kid, I don't think that it really was that big of a deal to me. I think I just didn't really realize the magnitude of that. But now as an adult, thinking about having 3 kids, a wife, you're totally changing job fields, and you decide, I'm going to go back to school. Nowadays, I feel like there are way more instances of that. But early 2000s, like that was a big deal. And it's like, go dad, like good for you. But seeing him do that and then go on to, he and my mom started a heating and cooling business out in Odessa. And that eventually led to a retail space that they opened a store for other things. So I saw my parents own businesses for pretty much my entire life. They still do, but that definitely formed a lot of ideas in my head, whether I realized it at the time or not. But that's, I think, a big part of my story. So, as I said, I grew up in Odessa. I did not leave until it came time for college. And I went to Missouri Western State University up in St. Joe. Go Griffs for any fellow Griffins listening. And it's so funny to me because if you know Odessa, where I think it's like 5,000 people at this point, there are many other towns that are much smaller, but it was kind of a small town. And then to go from Odessa to St. Joe, I thought I was living city girl life. I was like, look at me. I live in a town with 2 Walmarts. This is crazy. They have stoplights. They have a mall. There are multiple McDonald's to choose from. Like, I thought it was such a big deal. And not to trash on St. Joe at all. They are a bigger city, but compared to now the fact that I live in Kansas City, I'm realizing, girl, you have so much more to learn. So once I moved there, I went to school there. I was there for about 6 years that I stayed even after I graduated. But I started off with a journalism degree when I was in school. Now, let's also think back about what was happening in journalism about 2009, 2010, and all those newspapers closing and going out of business. Well, unfortunately, my degree was in print journalism. I had wanted to do magazines, not necessarily newspaper, but there's not a lot of magazines to apply to here in the Midwest, so my options were already limited. But when all that was happening, my advisors, all of our advisors, basically kind of circled us up and was like, hey, we think you should probably add another major on because there is a high chance that there will not be jobs for you once you graduate. Not to be Debbie Downers, but maybe you should have a backup plan, which I think is hilarious because the whole thing about going to college is you always have like something for sure to do. You have a degree. That was what was drilled into our heads. But anyway, I ended up picking public relations as my second major, which is very closely related to journalism, so it worked in my favor. And because of that, I ended up meeting so many more people. It ended up leading me into event planning because I worked on campus doing that kind of thing, which then in turn led me to social media. And full circle, all of that experience led me to many of the job experience that I had post-college. And now here we are, back at the beginning almost, where I'm interviewing people and talking about, all of their dreams and passions, which basically is journalism. So I think that's actually really funny. So after college, decided to move to Kansas City. And of course, actually was starting to feel that quote, big city life at that point. And that is where I met my husband, or now husband. And at the time when we were first dating, we were both working at a restaurant. And if you've ever been a waitress, a busser, a host, a bartender, a manager, anything worked in the restaurant industry, your schedule is unpredictable. And because of that, we had to try and figure out, okay, what's one day that overlaps that we could go do a date? And that ended up being Tuesdays, which we did this whole thing before I was really into Instagram. I remember we did it on Snapchat that our friends thought it was so funny that we would go on these things called Tuesdates, and we would literally just leave the house at 10 or 11 and just go downtown, walk until we found something. They were like, this seems cool. Let's do that. And that was just our weekly ritual. And we loved doing that because we were finding all of these new things that we had no idea about. And then because of that, we became the couple that people would come to us asking for recommendations, especially when you live out in the burbs. And as I said, this was before, Instagram, TikTok, Reels, anything was good about, I guess, promoting that kind of life. It wasn't as easy to just look up stuff like that. Or in my opinion, it wasn't. I could have been in the very recesses of the internet, so I didn't know. But people would ask us for recommendations like, hey, we want to go downtown on a date night. This is kind of the vibe we're thinking. Where should we go? And I loved sharing these cool places that we had found, the activities, the music venues, the restaurants, the places to go for drinks, the coffee shops. That was my favorite part, is sharing my love of Kansas City with other people. And I think that, yet again, another reason that led me into this. And of course, I mentioned that I have worked many different places since college that all kind of combined made a overall person that I am today, which that's what you are. You are made up of your life experiences. And I loved that I worked these different positions because you almost get different outlooks on that. So for example, I worked for a hotel. I worked for a PR firm that was specifically a lot of restaurants where a lot of our clients loved that. Got to do a lot of food content for social media. So fun. I worked for a boutique event planning company where we did weddings and fun little pop-ups and multiple of these things. Oh, and while I'm still all doing this, of course, you have to have, the side job of bartending, waitressing, that kind of thing. And I am very grateful for all of those experiences. Even if they didn't last long, they led me exactly where we are today. And yet again, everything is a networking opportunity. A lot of these people that I met at other jobs, they have gone on to do other cool things. Fun fact, a lot of those people are going to end up being guests on the podcast. So there you go. I'm giving you a little sneak peek if you want to do a deep dive on everywhere I've worked. But so, obviously, how we got here. The original idea that I had for this years ago was not a podcast. It was, it may have been during COVID or maybe even pre-COVID, and then also again during the pandemic when everyone was doing dual live videos and talking to people, because of course that was our only way of interacting at the time. But I thought that was so cool. So the original idea was to just interview my friends that I thought were doing really cool things, because what else are we going to do, because we're stuck at home. And while that was a big thing then, I don't think it's a match for my personality and where we are at in social media now. I think live videos have their place and are great for education sessions or, live, if you're at an event. It just depends on that. But for me personally, I don't love that. You guys don't see all of the times that I'm doing multiple takes back here because I coughed or I said something that I was like, I hate how that sounded. So let's redo it. Let's rewind. And so because of that, I was trying to think of other ways to accomplish what I was trying to do. And I was like, well, maybe do I do a series on TikTok? Do I do a series on, Reels? Do I just do long form YouTube content? I don't know. And then I remember, I think it was a very fleeting comment. Let me say this. And I was sitting with my husband, we were scrolling. And because there's been such a big boom in podcasts recently, over the last, couple years. And maybe that's also just because they're making bigger pushes on social media that I'm seeing in my algorithm. But I looked at him and I was like, should I have a podcast? Fully joking. I was fully joking. And he whipped his head around and he said, yes, you do. He's like, that honestly, I've never thought of that on my own. But once you said that, he said, that clicked. that seems like something you need to do. And we love a good, supportive husband, and he is. He is fantastic. He is a great partner that has my back constantly. This man would not let me forget this idea, because that is my personality, that I say, hey, I have an idea. But I was, just an idea. Like, I'm probably never going to do it, but just here's something to throw out there. He said, no, we're not doing that. I am not letting you forget this, because this is a fantastic idea. He would not let me forget it. He would send me research on podcasts. He would send me research on equipment. He would send me research on topics. Funny enough with topics, but the whole idea was always kind of this. And, I don't think we would be here right now if it wasn't for him, because he did wear me down a little bit, but he was so insistent that this fit my path, my journey of what I've wanted to do and where I've wanted the parent company of locally grown media that I own, of what I want to do. And he said, this is a perfect branch to add to that tree. And I mean, he was right. I definitely feel like this was meant to be. So, what can you expect from this show? Well, I will tell you. Every week, I will be interviewing a business owner, an entrepreneur, or a representative from a local business that's here in the Kansas City area. And I want to get the behind the scenes, their why, what brought them to this place in their life that they decided this was the time to do this business. And then, of course, everything in between. My idea, obviously, is they already have their own platform, most likely, in their business platform, whether it be, just their website, any other interviews they've done, their social media, etc. Maybe even their second platform is their personal profiles. But I would like to give them a second or third platform, however you want to call that, to showcase the person behind the curtain, if that makes sense. Because a lot of times what we see with business accounts, especially on social media, is they're showing the services, they're showing the products, they're showing what the public already sees. I want to see what we don't normally see. I want to show you guys what we don't normally see. And I am very excited to get that. Their tips and their tricks, what they've learned, and all of that. So, very excited for the guests we have to come. So, on the podcast next week, our first episode with an interviewed person. I'm so excited. And little sneak peek, our guest is Justin Fitzwater. So for all of those who know me personally, you know that Justin and I have been friends for a very long time. I am so excited to give him a chance to talk. And this man can talk. Like, he is a very knowledgeable human being. And we always joked that when we would get in these long-winded talks about art, I was like, we should have a podcast. So it just makes sense that he is the first one that I interviewed. But I am very excited for you guys to hear him talk about leather, because he's the owner of Fitzwater Leather. He does hand-tooled koozies and leather wallets, leather belts, and a bunch of fire service-related products, because he is a firefighter. So definitely tune in for that. Very excited. All right. And lastly, if you have someone that you would like to nominate for an interview, would love to hear your nominations, please send us a DM on Instagram at highsandlow_podcast, or you can email to locallygrownmediakc@gmail.com. So I'm very excited to hear all of your nominations. And on that note, I'm going to wrap up. Thank you so much for your support. And it would mean the world to me if you could like, subscribe, follow, share, all of the fun things, because of course that's how the podcast grows and that's how more people can find us. And lastly, if you wouldn't mind leaving us a review, also would love that. So we will see you next week. See you later.